So tonight on State of Play, we are joined by two active duty airmen, i.e. service members in the U.S. Air Force, in case y'all aren't tracking, who have chosen to become conscientious objectors in response to U.S. complicity in what is happening in Gaza, specifically. So just to define our terms, a conscientious objector is an individual who has claimed the right to refuse or perform military service on the grounds of freedom of conscience or religion. The term has also been extended to objecting to working for the military-industrial complex due to a crisis of conscience. So on March 8th, 1995, the United Nations Commissions on Human Rights Resolution 1995/83 stated that persons performing military service should not be excluded from the right to have conscientious objections to military service. So the Center on Conscience and War, a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights of conscience, has, since October 7th, helped over 40 U.S. troops file for conscientious objector status, who cite the U.S. role in the Gaza genocide as the fundamental deciding factor. So the U.S. Air Force said it has acted on 36 conscientious objector applications since the beginning of 2021. Of those, 29 were apparently granted. So we may touch on that here in a bit, but for now, let me bring on and introduce Juan Betancourt, senior airman in the U.S. Air Force, currently stationed in Texas, who has stated, quote, "This ongoing genocide, primarily funded by the American taxpayer money, has served as a catalyst for our conscience to evolve and for us to remain resolute in our humanistic stance against participating in any form of war." We also are joined by senior airman Larry Hebert, avionics specialist based in Rota, Spain, conscientious objector applicant seeking separation as a result of the genocidal terrorist attacks on Gaza by the U.S.-backed Israeli militia. You guys are pulling no punches. Thanks so much for coming on.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that you are being far more productive with your free time right now than I was. You know, every free moment I spent on active duty was like drinking and pursuing women in order to distract myself from the cognitive dissonance required to fight for America's freedom in Afghanistan. So all things being equal, you are way further ahead of me in the activism game. So congrats on that. So I watched some of the interviews you did with like NBC, and it was strictly just factual reporting. But here we're going to get more conversational and expansive and really get into the weeds. So before we get into Gaza and objector status, I wanted to ask y'all, and this is a broad question, whoever wants to go first, why did you decide to join the military? Was it simply practical, or was your decision also driven by a system of beliefs, desire for service? What?
You can go first, Juan, if you want.
Well, there was really a plethora of reasons why I joined. There was a professional desire. I was 29 at the time, so I wanted to, do something interesting, different in my early 30s. At that time, I had been in academia for almost 10 years, and I saw the military as a great step towards a career of public service.
Yeah, and for me, it was mostly for the financial incentive. At the time, I was newly married and about to have my first child, and so I kind of needed something to give me that sense of security, and the Air Force was that option. And I had met dozens of different veterans from all different branches, and they had all told me that I should join the military, and I won't have to worry about, my, paycheck to paycheck and struggling to meet ends meet. And then they all, for whatever reason, recommended the Air Force. And that came from Marines, Navy, Army, and Air Force themselves. So I figured if dozens of people are recommending this, then I'd be a fool not to take them up on their advice.
No, I hear you. It was actually a mixture of both for me too. Not a unique story, just trying to get out of a bad situation and a place to live and money. Also, I did kind of believe in what we were doing too at the time. So it was a mixture. So I guess how has the continued military action in Gaza influenced your decision to become a conscientious objector? Did you know about the situation in Palestine before October 7th, or is this all relatively new for y'all?
Yeah, I'd say I was pretty much completely ignorant to Israel Palestine. I didn't know anything about these countries or the conflict, and so October 7th was ultimately like that wake up call. I didn't actually find out until probably October 10th or 11th when I was scrolling through social media and actually seeing the footage coming out. But yeah, once I saw what was going on, it didn't take too long to kind of figure out what the situation was. And I tried to give it a both sides a chance, right? I wanted to get the Palestinian perspective and the Israeli perspective, and there's so many like flaws in the Israeli perspective and so many lies. It's really hard to like not just see through that.
For me, it was a catalyst. I've been aware of the situation in Palestine ever since, early college, but it's a very different situation when one knows about these issues through a diplomatic foreign policy lens rather than being, in the midst of it, being implicated directly. There's an experiential dimension that comes with this conflict that after October just made it impossible for me to look away and to ignore my own complicity within the conflict.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of knew somewhat about what was going on. I'd read official like military literature about the IDF being incredibly problematic, and I knew the response was going to be bad, but I had no idea it was going to be this bad. I think on October 15th, I saw them dropping like 1,000-pound GBUs, and I've seen those dropped in theater. I was like, oh my. Wow, they're actually in the most densely populated place on Earth. And you guys were in the Air Force. You may have more of a knowledge about what was actually being dropped. You said, Larry, that you're avionics specialist, so you work on aircraft. And I think in one of your press statements, did you mention that was a factor that you occupationally worked on these same aircraft that were conducting these bombing campaigns?
Yeah. I don't know the specifics as far as like the missions that are being pushed directly to Israel. Mm-hmm. At the time of October 7th, I was actually on absence. I had just had a child in July, and so I didn't even get back to work until I think the end of October. But eventually, I did partake in a mission that was delivering cargo to Israel, and that obviously had weapons, and that was like a huge wake up call for me. Like I knew I had already solidified like my beliefs that I wanted to get out, and obviously I was highly against Israel and our support for them, but the actually seeing like what was being sent, that was just devastating to me. And I wish at that moment that I had said, like, I can't do this. I can't be a part of this mission. And I didn't, because it wasn't really like my role in it wasn't very like, it wasn't like a lead role or anything. We're just like gassing these planes. We're not like, loading the cargo, and like, that's not my position. But yeah, I still wish I would have done that. And I don't know whether those weapons that were being sent were like offensive or defensive, like for the Iron Dome, for instance. But yeah, it's still like a really like regrettable thing that I did. So I still think about that.
Mm-hmm.
I was in communications, and my mission had no direct involvement with that area of the world. However, once you start understanding these institutions as systems that are, entwine with one another, you begin to see how all of us are implicated and how this is ultimately one large mission that supports Israeli military offensive.
Right. And you, I think it was Larry, you said in a press statement, or no, I think it was Juan in your press statement, you said that Aaron Bushnell was a catalyst, his act of extreme protest in front of the Israeli embassy earlier this year. Can you tell me more about like that? And did you have conversations with other service members where you guys kind of like found each other and were like, oh yeah, I feel this way about that action as well? And did it like make you find your like clique within the military? Like just what happened after that?
Somewhat. So yes, Aaron's self-immolation in front of the Israeli embassy in DC was a turning point because I began to see how I was not alone. I had been publicly speaking to peers and leadership against what was going on. I was very adamant about denying orders in the case my mission was put in service of assisting the IDF. But after Aaron's self-immolation, began to really question deeply my implication in the military. And it was through that I began to contact Veterans for Peace, and I began to speak more openly with colleagues. And surprisingly, many of them share similar sentiments. They understood that what we're witnessing through our phones, what we're witnessing through media reports, are absolute war crimes. They're genocidal in intent. But again, the military is a complex institution. People have, Greg, retirement, housing, education on the line. And so they are beholden to those interests and are scared to speak out. And it's also an institution that doesn't really welcome dissent. It's the institution in which you have to follow orders. And so a lot of them silently supported me and pushed me further to continue dissenting until I finally made the decision to claim conscious objector status because I was just no longer comfortable. My conscience was no longer comfortable with participating in any form of war.
Yeah. So I just wanted to play the press statement that what we saw, the official position of the Pentagon with General Pat Ryder, who is the head of the press corps, the press wing for the Pentagon, and he gets asked straight up, well, does this have any effect, or is this reflective of what's happening in the ranks? And he's like, well, Israel has the right to defend itself, and we keep pressuring them to follow international humanitarian law. Just in case you guys forgot about this infamous interview.
Yesterday, an active duty service member set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in protest of U.S. support for Israel's operations in Gaza. Has the secretary been briefed on Airman Bushnell, and is he concerned that maybe this airman's actions may indicate that there's a bigger issue within the military as far as U.S. support for this ongoing operation?
Yeah, so the secretary is following the situation. I know the Air Force has confirmed the airman's death. They do plan to provide additional information 24 hours after next of kin notifications are complete. It certainly is a tragic event. We do extend our condolences to the airman's family. In terms of the incident itself, Tara, as you know, the DC Metropolitan Police Department has the lead for responding to questions about that incident. So anything on that, I'd have to refer you to them.
Just push it off on the DC police.
That this might indicate that there's a deeper issue, maybe the U.S. military personnel being concerned about how weapons and support for Israel is being used on civilians in Gaza.
Well, look, from a Department of Defense standpoint, since Hamas's brutal attacks on October 7th, we've been focused on the 4 key areas that the Secretary set out from the onset. That's protecting U.S. forces and citizens in the region, supporting Israel's inherent right to defend itself from terrorist attacks, working closely with Israel to support and secure the release of hostages from Hamas, and ensuring that the conflict between Hamas and Israel doesn't escalate into a broader regional conflict. And so those objectives are what continue to inform our approach to the situation in the Middle East.
Okay, I mean, I really wouldn't expect any like enlightened statement or anything from the Pentagon, because no matter what, they will publicly toe the administration's line, whatever lead the executive branch is giving. So as an outsider, no longer being involved in the military, I was just wondering like what the conversation was immediately after this happened. And, you know, as someone who was speaking out, have you faced any social or hierarchical backlash from your command or your peers since you decided to file as an objector?
I haven't received any backlash from my leadership. I've received a lot of messages from support from peers, people, again, that, you know, silently support me. But I've also received messages that reject and question my motives. Peers call me a coward, a traitor. And it's a good opportunity to remind them that, you know, the same Constitution that we pledge an oath to, you know, enshrines freedom of conscience. And this is something that is within our right as citizens and as service members. And I also take that opportunity to, you know, speak about what's going on in Gaza, what's been going on since 48. And so those sort of opportunities, rather than, you know, becoming, you know, pugnacious and sort of leading to nowhere, become opportunities for me to talk about Palestine in general and to talk about why we should reject war in all forms.
Yeah, and I didn't really face much backlash at all. I was actually surprised when I got back from DC, and I had went to DC because of the lack of response to Aaron Bushell's self-immolation from all leadership within the government and in the military. So that's ultimately what set me off, kind of, because at that point I was going to just get out quietly and you know, write out the rest of my contract. And when they showed that much just disrespect towards another service member, giving his life for this and just not acknowledging him or iterating his name, that was just so against everything I thought that we kind of stood for. But when I got back from DC, I was actually surprised at how many people supported me, because I hadn't had those conversations internally about Gaza and about Israel, and it was definitely surprising. And there have been people that that were obviously upset with what I did, but most people kind of just try to ignore the topic or you know, ignore me as a person, because they have their own careers. And like Juan brought up, the military sort of dangles the benefits in front of you, and I guess it kind of scares a lot of people from speaking out or speaking up internally even. And I have heard from others that there is a large amount of service members that wholeheartedly disagree with our current policies. And it's extremely hard for them to voice those concerns because of the reliance on the military to support their family. A lot of these service members have kids and multiple kids. So I understand from that regard, but for me personally, I would rather struggle paycheck to paycheck than take money from an organization that is supporting this.
No. Yeah, I get it. I mean, I never filed or took the stance that you guys did. Honestly, when I was in a combat unit, I was pretty much more scared of death than social annihilation or disgrace, because that's just where my head was. Didn't have a family, but instead of re-upping and re-enlisting, I just wrote out my contract. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. So I mean, I've heard from multiple sources that other service members are appalled by what's happening, and the retention numbers are going to suffer. Also, recruiting numbers are going to suffer. Like, we have the biggest recruiting crisis in what U.S. military history right now, and a lot of this has to do with our engagement in forever wars. This is one of the big reasons we don't want to put boots on the ground in Yemen or actually go back, and because like it's a huge national security concern that just about everybody except the Air Force and the Marines are below quota significantly, and it's not going to help when younger generations who are more politically aware than I was as like some millennial looking at this and being like, I don't want to be part of the death machine. Like, why are we actually fighting these wars? They grew up watching Iraq and Afghanistan turn into nothing. So all of this is actually just not healthy for the United States military in terms of achieving its operational goals and remaining like combat and operationally effective. So we see like retention rates are going to drop. Recruiting is going to become a massive issue. People are worried about the draft, but that will backfire if they even try something that crazy at this point. So it just seems like this massive policy, this unilateral policy of supporting these wars unconditionally, refusing diplomatic solutions is just incredibly harmful. And I'm just wondering if that's like a conversation that y'all have had.
It has been. And I think, beyond political awareness regarding U.S. foreign policy and forever wars, I think there's also an awareness of how veterans have been left out to dry, have been failed by a system. You can see the suicide rates, the number of homeless veterans, the lack of support they receive, and they see the duplicity. They see that there's a propaganda that hails them as heroes, but treats them as disposable. And people are beginning to question whether that is a career route worth pursuing. And they're also questioning the patriotic pillars in which that service is sort of upheld in American society.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that others are going to start following in your footsteps? You are among the first like visibly apparent people to file for conscientious objector status. So my question is, do you think other people will follow? I mean, it's already symbolically significant that you're doing it, and like not re-enlisting will also be just as kind of impactful practically. But yeah, do you see anyone following your footsteps? And do you think that will change policy at all, or institutional policy within the Air Force, military, and what exactly was that process?
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it already. Retention rates and recruitment are already bleeding. As the operational tempo. So now with this going on, and with me and Juan and Harrison Mann and Riley Livermore, I believe, and just more and more people coming out publicly, it's going to really start to hurt numbers. I think the more that we continue to speak out and reject what's going on, and I think it's extremely important for people to utilize their rights and voice their concerns internally too, because I think a lot of people would be surprised at how many people feel this way. And I think that ultimately will change the atmosphere. And I don't think people have to directly apply for conscientious objector, but that obviously helps as far as the number side of it, and to show that this is exactly what we are opposing. I don't think anybody joining the military was really going in thinking, yeah, I want to continue warfare for the end of time. I think the ultimate goal for people is, what we think is like, we're involved in these wars to eventually get to a point of peace. But that's not the ultimate goal, like behind the scenes. It's kind of something we're told to keep us motivated and think we're doing the right thing, and we're just not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure hope to herald a change of attitude. As Larry said, perhaps not, for mass movement of conscious objectors, but at least for people to speak out and do whatever they can in whatever capacity. I receive messages, people calling me hero or that you're being so brave. And really, at least I can speak for myself here. I feel like I'm doing the bare minimum. I'm just following my conscience. I'm seeing wickedness. I'm calling it out. And I'm doing the little that I can, and as the capacity of an airman, to try to change or this country's policy and the course in which we're in right now.
Right. And just as kind of some final questions, I don't know anything about the conscientious objector process. Do you retain your benefits if you get approved and you get separated?
Yeah, you can get out with an honorable. Yeah, you can get out with an honorable. It just depends on how the process goes. It's actually interesting. I learned from Maria Santelli, who was with the Center on Conscience and War, that the approval rate is only about 50% for conscientious objectors, unless they work with the CCW, in which the rate actually goes up to 99% approval rating. So if you reach out to the GI Rights Hotline and work with the Center on Conscience of War, the Quaker House, whatever it is, they get you on the right track. They've dealt with this for decades, and I think a lot of people, once they begin writing the application, they'll start looking for resources to give them the inspiration and the answers to the questions that are in the application. And that's actually how I became a CEO. Was like I kind of already believed in, anti-war. I already felt like I had that, but I didn't know how or why. And while writing the application and looking for these resources, that's how I really developed and solidified those beliefs.
So in closing, I just wanted to, is there anything else you'd like to say in the off chance there are any active duty service members watching this? If they are watching this, they're probably on the fence right now. So just any closing remarks that you can think of.
I would
Yeah.
Urge them to follow their conscience and to think about the legacy that they want to leave behind for their children and grandchildren. I would also direct them to Veterans for Peace, the website. Larry and I have been championing this appeal for redress, which is inspired by the first appeal for redress that came out in 2006 in the wake of the highly unpopular invasion of Iraq. And this is a safe, constitutionally protected campaign that allows service members to directly express their moral outrage, their disgust to what's going on in Gaza directly to elected officials. So again, this is protected speech. It's constitutionally protected again. And so we want to leave that note here and encourage them to write to their elected officials, make their voice heard.
Which is their right. And
Absolutely.
they're well within their means to do so.
That's something worth reiterating, because when I was in the military and active duty, I didn't really imagine that I had rights, but you do. Okay, you definitely do have rights. You may have signed your kind of about 4 years. I'm not sure, however long your contract was. Signed a few years of your life away, but you still are a human being with rights. So, and you can exercise them. So we're going to link the Center on Conscience and War down to the bottom, and also Veterans for Peace and the hotline y'all mentioned. So discontent within the ranks has historically always been a political force and a decider on whether or not a country or a nation commits to another war. And it doesn't seem, with the recruiting crisis ongoing, that is sustainable to have a functional military that's up to operational requirements and, going to another forever war in the Middle East. So hopefully logic and sanity will prevail. I wanted to thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to come on and talk about your experience as conscientious objectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Greg. I appreciate it.
Peace.